Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with your next PB&J card class. And today I'll be showing you a technique using one of our stencil designs, and I'll be showing you how to create a textured background. And here's a look at the card that we'll be creating. The stencil that I'm using is Trailing Vines, and then I'm also going to be using that awesome big butterfly die cut from the Flights of Fancy Creative Die set by Penny Black. So to begin, I am working on watercolor paper, and I'm using Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft whipped spackle to put the texture through my stencil. And I would describe this as kind of like marshmallow fluff. It's like a modeling paste that you can use with your stencils. And I'm just putting this on with a palette knife. So I've got my stencil down. I'm just holding it with my hands, but you could secure it with like some removable washi tape. And I'm putting a very thin layer of the spackle through the stencil. And really, sometimes I've done this before and I've put too much of the spackle and it takes forever for it to dry. So really you can put it on there and then really scrape it down, and you don't need very much to cover the entire stencil. So you can see once I've covered all the areas on the paper, I just keep scraping it down, pressing that palette knife on there just so that it's a very thin layer. Then you want to be sure to close this up right away, take any excess off your palette knife, and then you can remove your stencil. Now you'll want to set that aside to dry, and while you're doing that, be sure to clean off your stencil right away. But here's a look at that awesome texture that you can get with that stencil Trailing Vines. Now once that was dry, I wanted to add some color and to really accent the texture that's in the background. So I'm using some Sakura Koi watercolors from the Field Sketch Box, and I'm just mixing up like a really light golden color. So I'm just grabbing some yellow and then also some white and then blending those together. And because I added my whipped spackle to watercolor paper, I can now add the wetness of this medium on top and not worry about too much curling. And all I'm doing is I'm just mixing that paint that I made with some water and applying it randomly onto the background. For the most part, I applied it just to the upper left-hand corner and the bottom right-hand corner. I'm not pressing too hard with my brush because while I did let the whipped spackle dry, I don't want to, move it around on there by pressing really hard with the brush. So I applied that watercolor onto the background. Then I let that dry. I didn't use my heat gun on that, as when you apply a lot of heat to that, then it will make that whipped spackle bubble up a little bit, so I just let it dry on its own. Now this is Ranger Archival ink in the color of Tree Branch, and I'm just very lightly applying this on those corners as well and kind of pouncing it on top of that texture, and it will pick up more of the texture for you. So you can decide, oh, you got a sneak peek of the butterfly. You can decide how much or how little of that distressing that you want on there. And then I'm just going to add a few splatters. And what I really love about doing this with the stencil and starting with the white background and the white whipped spackle is that you can colorize this background however you want. So if you wanted to have a turquoise background or have those vines be different colors or shades of green, you can do that after you've added that whipped spackle or modeling paste through your stencil. I did decide to darken things up a little bit too, so I grabbed a little more brown paint in those corners. And here's just a close-up of how that texture looks on the card. It's really fun and looks great in real life. So now I also wanted to show you how I made my butterfly. It's a really easy technique. I'm using Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus watercolors. You could use whatever watercolors you have on hand. I really like these because they're really bright and bold color and you don't need very much. So I put on my acrylic black, sprayed it with some water. I die cut this Flights of Fancy butterfly die from watercolor paper as well. I spritzed it before I pressed it into the paint, and then I'm just setting it aside to dry. So I let it dry, and I did heat this up with the heat gun to dry in between each step so that when I added the next layer I didn't get too much blending of the color that was beneath, and I just kept building up more and more color. So now here I'm adding some orange, spraying it with water, again spraying my dye, and then pressing that into the paint. You can kind of play around with where you want it to be on the butterfly by pressing it only into certain sections of the butterfly. And then finally I'm adding some yellow, and I have the exact colors used and all the supplies listed at the end of the video. This is a really easy technique. I just now adding some of that tree branch archival ink. You could use distress inks too around the outer edges and kind of toning down some of the yellow so it's not too neon looking. But you could do this with your flower die cuts. There's so many different styles of die cuts you could use with this technique as well. And I like the look of the watercolor paired with that textured background. Just gives a fun artsy mixed media look to the entire card. So once I was done distressing that butterfly, I added it to my note card. I also cut a little tiny tag, just hand cut it and stamped it with our snippets sentiment set. One I'm reaching for a lot because it has all those nice small little sentiments. So I hope you enjoyed today's video and technique. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Also be sure to like our Facebook page, visit us on Pinterest and Twitter, and you can also find more inspiration on our blog and website. Thanks for watching.